Our next speaker is Councillor Mammoliti. No, there was no motion. The motion, no. Well, he did, but it wasn't, I said, it's fine, it's done. Okay. Councillor Mammoliti.
Madam Speaker, I want to give some examples of what I would consider human nature, I guess. And that is... when many of us go to restaurants,
tell us the
we tend to look into the restaurant and tend to wonder how busy it might be and how popular it might be. And we tend to go into the restaurants, if we don't know them quite well, that are loaded with people. The ones that seem to be busy, the ones that seem to be a little crazy. The ones that are empty, we usually say, well, the food might not be very good here, and I don't think I'm going to take the chance. When we go to shows and concerts, we usually go to the concerts that are the busiest, with the most people, blah, 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 blah. Nightclubs, lineups, out the door, they're the ones we choose to go in because there must be something special with respect to this nightclub and the amount of people that are actually going through.
What's your point?
My point is, and that I'm trying to make, is that for some reason, the busier a street and the more popular it becomes. The slower a street with respect to how people move through, and the more popular it becomes. That in fact, I believe that if traffic is at a standstill, that the businesses actually thrive on those streets. A prime example of that was, you remember Yonge Street a few years ago? How congested it was, how you could not move on Yonge Street. The store owners on Yonge Street absolutely loved it. They didn't want the traffic to go through quickly. They felt that that contributed to their success. And around the world, that is the case. That in fact, if you attempt to slow down traffic, in whatever manner, it becomes more popular for the pedestrian who does a lot of shopping, and it becomes a lot more popular for cyclists. Yes, it does. And why don't we want to take a page from some of the successful cities that have learned from their experiences? That's all that some of us are saying here. I'm saying it because I believe in that model. I think it actually does create business. Jarvis, if you drive down, is very fast. Somebody had mentioned, I think it was Councillor McConnell that mentioned it in her speech, that it actually, traffic is very fast at times down Jarvis. And it's time to slow it down. So you slow it down by proposing to remove a lane. And yes, you slow it down as well for people to pay attention to the others that are using that street and sidewalks. Whether it's pedestrians or whether it's the cyclists that now will be using Jarvis, people have got to pay attention to that. When we all go for our license and the privilege of having a vehicle license, whether that's car or whether it's a bicycle license, one of the first things you're taught about are cyclists. Use your rear view mirrors. Watch out for cyclists. Be careful. You're at fault. Even if the cyclist does something wrong, you're at fault. And so now the debate becomes the difference in rights between someone who's driving a vehicle and the cyclist. That's what I've been hearing. And I don't like that argument because I think everybody has the right to use the road. And I said it earlier when I stood, that cyclists don't have any other options. They can only use the road. They can't use the sidewalks. And so what is the debate about today? Seriously, what is it about? Some have pointed out that it costs money and are saying that perhaps we should be fixing other roads before this one. Is that the argument today? Or is the argument about a fundamental logic that you don't like cyclists on the roads? why don't we be honest about that if it is? Now, Councillor Ray has worked this into his equation, and he must be patted on the back for doing that. And it takes work to be able to put this into any equation. To try and get lanes, cycle lanes, in your communities is a hard task. And so, might it be that some other councillors don't want to work as hard, and when they find somebody doing that, they want to hide behind policy and say it's because of the policy, we shouldn't be straying from it, how dare we do that? Get up off your rear ends and do the same thing. And if it isn't about bike lanes, do something else. Take on your own pet project. And don't just sit at City Hall and try and change people's minds and create scenarios in the back rooms. Spend some time in your communities and change the flavor of your communities. Councillor Ray is suggesting to change the flavor on Jarvis, and it will. And then when everybody wants to go down to party on Jarvis, they're going to say, what a wonderful street Jarvis is. What happened here? It's so wonderful. At that point, who will be around to remind everyone that it perhaps it was the local councillor that changed the way things are done. Perhaps it's someone who actually stood up and cared for his community and cared for the voices, yes, the voices that I hear every day. So when Councillor Holiday stands up and says, I hear voices. When Councillor Holiday stands up and says he's in Etobicoke, he never sees any cyclists. Well, yeah, I do, and I think most of us do that are in the West District. And I don't know where that's coming from. Perhaps the cyclists that aren't there get the feeling that the politicians don't want them there, and that's probably why they're not using our streets. I say something different. I say let's make sure that we try and get them out there as well. It's not just about the Humber River, as someone pointed out. It's also about encouraging people to use the roads, encouraging them and wanting them to do it, and not saying you're excluded because I believe some other policy needs to be changed, or maybe we should be fixing another road somewhere in Scarborough before we do something like this. Thanks.
Let the voices speak.
Thank you.